There was a wolf, and this wolf got hold of a little shepsela, little sheep, decided that this will be its dinner, and starts to fight. And the little shepsela, the little sheep, starts to fight back, and there begins a fight, a milchama between the wolf and the little shepsela, and they're screaming, it's loud, they're crying, shouting. There's a war going on between these two animals, until at one point it goes silent and everything is quiet. What's the reason for the silence? The reason is because the wolf has the little shepsela in a deathlock. It's holding in a deathlock, and the little sheep knows that if it makes one move in the wrong direction, its life is over. So there's silence. That is the mashal to our generation. The Satan has every single one of us in a deathlock, and any move that we make could be deadly. And it's important for us not to be silent, but rather to get up, to shout, to make a noise, to try to fight that Satan, try to make sure that we don't make the wrong move. There's a Moyedika Rambam. We're going to learn a few Rambams today. The Rambam at the end of Perek Chov Beis in Hilchos Isurei Bia Halacha Yudches says as follows, and I quote the Rambam: Ein lecha davar b'chol haTorah kula. There is nothing in the entire Torah, says the Rambam, shu kosher l'roiv b'nei ha'om, that is difficult to the majority of people. Ella, only one thing: lifroish min ha'arayis, to separate from the inyonei arayis, as I state in the Rambam. It's one of the hardest things for most of Klal Yisrael, says the Rambam, to separate, to distance himself from. Asks the Prisha in Even Ezer Siman Chav Hey, there's a steer in the Rambam, doesn't make any sense, there's a contradiction. What's that? The Rambam just told us, I read it to you, that one of the hardest things that is difficult for most people is to separate from arayis, is to distance himself from inyonei, the things that we're discussing in these shiurim. However, at the end of the Rambam he says, which is a Gemara, but the Rambam says, Ruban begezel bi'uton ba'arayis. Most people stumble with gezel, with stealing, and a minority stumble with arayis. Asks the Prisha, hello, the Rambam just told us Roy b'nei Adam have a difficulty with arayis, but most people have a problem with gezel. That's what he says at the end. Which one is it? Make up your mind. Answers the Prisha like this. And it's an important yesod to remember. Says the Prisha, for people that ignite, that use the Yetzer Hara, that are involved in the Yetzer Hara, for those people, it's almost impossible to get out of. If you're going to constantly be igniting, fueling that Yetzer Hara, to distance yourself and all of a sudden to say stop, is extremely difficult. It's possible, but it's extremely difficult. Whereas a person that trains himself, that learns how to separate, to distance, and slowly manages to do that, he's only from the mi'at. He's from the minority. And yes, gezel may be an issue, but arayos will not be the biggest issue. Somebody wrote a shaila, it's printed in Shevet HaLevi, Rav Osner Zatzal. It was a bacher in yeshiva who said, I don't understand. The Gemara tells us in Brachos that the Rabbeinu Shalom created the Yetzer Hara, but he created Torah as a tavlin. He created Torah as the remedy, as the medication, as the medicine, to heal a person from the Yetzer Hara. I don't understand, says this bacher, as he writes to Rav Osner Zatzal, I suffer so badly. I'm sitting in yeshiva yomim v'loila, and I'm learning. I'm suffering so badly from inyonei arayis. I can't stop myself looking. I can't stop myself pressing the wrong buttons, getting to the wrong sites, v'chulei v'chulei. What do I do? And Rav Osner wrote down that avad and avada chazala emes, and avada that a person learns Torah be'emes, it helps him from the Yetzer Hara. But if a person is busy with the Yetzer Hara, if a person is constantly igniting the Yetzer Hara, don't expect that the Torah that you learn is going to come and save you all of a sudden, because you cannot be involved. That's what the Rambam is telling us. That a person has to realize, yes, it's difficult, but slowly, if we manage to separate ourselves, it will help. Rav Moshe Aaron Stern Zatzal, Shkiach of Kamenetz, bring down that the hardest part of Shmiras Einayim, of watching our eyes, is the beginning. It's the hardest part. It's just the beginning. That's the hardest thing. Eventually it becomes easier. I met a fellow a couple of years ago in Lakewood, and he says to me that you should know I've been working on it. It was difficult for me. It was a married man with children. It was difficult, but I worked on it. And you should know it's hardly a taiva. That's what he said to me. And I said to him, thank you for sharing that, because now I can share it with others. That the beginning is a nightmare, it's Gehenna, it's difficult, it's hard, but it's possible. And it's the beginning, says Rav Moshe Aaron Stern Zatzal, that's the hardest. After you get over that hurdle, things become much easier. The Stipler has a letter in Krani de Igrasa, also in Michtav Tezvov, that he says every single time that a person is Oymid B'Nisoyan, he manages to win over, which we'll get to many different strategies, we'll talk about on a very practical level. It gets easier and easier, so a person has to realize. The Rambam writes in his Akdama that he split up, and he was the first one to do this, he split up the whole Torah into different parts. Before the Rambam came along, there was no one that did that. There was no Musudadika way of figuring out where to look at each section of Torah. The Rambam was Machadish, splitting up the Torah into different sections. And he explains why he called each one what he called them. And he calls one of them Sefer Kedusha. And in Sefer Kedusha, there are basically two halachas in Yonei Arayas and Meichlas Asuros. Things that you can't eat and forbidden mixtures and everything else. And the Rambam says why these two are called Sefer Kedusha? Because this is what separates us from the Goyim. What separates a Yid from a Goy is what he eats and what he looks at. And the inyonim that he's busy with over there. And it's very, very important to remember. I want to read to you a Moedika Rambam. Rabbi said this Rambam is a very important Rambam. Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Dalet, Halacha Dalet. The Rambam says like this. Umehen, and he's quoting various things that a person is very difficult to do tshuva. A person could do tshuva from anything. But there are certain things that have like a skula that you will not do tshuva. That it's very difficult you won't do tshuva. Right? He says, Ein cheskosoy loshuv mehem. Lefi shein dvarim kalim be'einei roi v'odam. They're like nothing in the eyes of people. It's like, I didn't do anything. One of them, and he quotes a list, I'm not going to go through them. But in Gimel, in the third one on the Rambam's list, he says as follows. Hamastakul ba'arayas. When a person looks at something inappropriate, when a person looks at that which he's not meant to be looking at. Mala al daitoy she'ein bekach klum. I didn't do anything. Shu'oymeh, he says to himself, V'chi ba'alti? Oy karavti etzla? V'ein yodeh shari'iyas einayim oven godel? She'goyremes l'gufan shel harayas, says the Rambam. That when a person looks at something he shouldn't, he thinks to himself, what did I do? What, I touched her? I was with her together in bed, chas v'shalom. I just looked. I looked, but I didn't touch. It's like going to a museum. You walk into a museum, and it says clearly on the thing, look, but don't touch. So that's what I did. I looked, I didn't touch. I didn't do anything. So the Heilige Rambam, person doesn't realize that the etzem is staklus, the re'iyas einayim, looking at it, is an oven godel ad ma'oid. Person doesn't realize what he's over on. The Gemara tells us, Ksubas Yudzayin Shabbos Samach Dalet Avodah Zorah Daf Chof. The Beis Yosef brings an Ebenezer Simon Chof Aleph. He says, Osel Istakel Be'ishes Ish Minat Torah. This is an Issa D'Oraisa. Shenem Avodah Surach V'Nevavchem V'Yachrei Nechem. As we know the pasuk, we say in Kriyas Shema. And the Rambam adds a Pniyos also D'Oraisa Di B'Mahara. We're dealing over here, Rabbi said, with an Issa of just looking. And when a person, when he wants to do tshuva, he thinks to himself, I just looked. I'm going to do tshuva over something I looked at. I didn't touch a chas v'shalom. I wasn't with a chas v'shalom. And I didn't do anything wrong. So the Rambam, this is one of the averas that people don't even do tshuva. Because they don't even think it's so bad. Rabbi said we're living in a Dara Mabul. We're living on the streets, not even on the streets, but often in our own pockets. We have the availability to see worse than they were able to see in Mitzrayim, B'shas Klal Yisrael being in there. And they were able to see pretty bad things over there. And in our own pockets, we're able to see in the privacy of our own home, in the privacy of our own Mukaimos and our Dalet Amas that nobody else sees. We're able to look at the worst possible things that anyone was ever able to look at. It's a Dara Mabel out there. And Rabbi said, think for a moment of what goes on in your head that's tempting you to look at these things. The eye is the greatest salesman. The eye is the greatest salesman of what goes on in your brain, telling you to look at those things. There seems to be like an unspoken promise. It's like, there's something over here that's going to give you pleasure. There's something over here that's going to give you geschmack. It's going to give you fulfillment. It's going to give you excitement. It's going to make you happy. It's going to do everything that you ever wanted. Psychologically, they say it's like, I'm offering you something. The eye is telling you, I'm offering you something. Just look, and you'll get whatever you need. We don't even know what it is. We can't even put it into words. We can't even explain it if we needed to and if somebody asked us to. The eye is the greatest salesman saying, look, I'm promising you something. And then what happens? And then you look. And then you realize 2 seconds after you looked, what a waste. The bubble burst. The air came out. There's absolutely nothing there. And not only that, imagine if a person is very, very thirsty and there's no liquid around. And there's no drinks around, and he says, I'm thirsty, has anybody got anything to help me quench my thirst? And someone says, sure, I have a cup of water. He's like, great, can I have it? He's like, yeah, but there's a lot of salt in there. It's very, very salty water. No problem, I'm so thirsty. And he takes it, he gulps it down. For about a second or two, it quenches his thirst. The liquid goes down in his parched lips and his parched mouth. But a second later, he's thirstier than he was before. So by looking, not only does it not fulfill the pleasures that the eye is telling you it will, but it's making you more thirsty. I need to see more. I need to see different things. That's what I need to do. And that's what's going on in your brain. If we realize what's going on, b'shas ha'maisa, we can't understand. And by the way, for all those that think if I'm married, it's much easier. When you're married, it's much, much worse. Much worse, because the taiva never came out of the love of your wife. She just happened to be the only one that you're allowed to be together with, and how difficult it is for her to compete with all of the images and things that you've seen that she cannot possibly compete with, which makes you feel unfulfilled, unhappy, and you obviously know what that leads with. I had a couple that I was dealing with a couple of years ago who were going through a very, very difficult time. Very, very difficult time in marriage. Baruch Hashem, things are great now. But at the time, it was a gefährlicher Matzav. I don't want to describe to you what was going on over there behind the scenes, but it was terrible. One thing I can tell you. People came over to me, and they said to me, I want a marriage like that couple. And I said, what? What does that mean? So obviously I'm not going to share anything, but I'm like, why? You should see what they post on their statuses. You should see the romantic pictures, the this, the that. Like, I would love to have such a marriage. And if only I had the ability to say, what are you, crazy? Do you know what's going on over there? This is what's going on with the media. This is what they're trying to sell you. Everything's great, everything's wonderful, everything's happy, everything's beautiful. Do you know what's going on behind the scenes? And not only that, what goes on in your brain, b'shas ma'aser, is even worse. There was a Russia in the history of Klal Yisrael that knew the secret, how to distance the Klal Yisrael from the Rabbeinu Shalom. And he knew that secret. And that was Bilam HaRasha. Bilam HaRasha knew the secret. The Gemara tells us, Sanhedrin Shovovim and Aleph, the Gemara says, Elohayim shel elu soine zimohi. Bilam HaRasha knew the secret. He knew what the Rabbeinu Shalom hates. And that's znus. In Yonei Arayas that we're dealing with is one thing the Rabbeinu Shalom hates. And it gets Klal Yisrael to be distant from Avinu Shebashamayim. Which is why we have to be extra careful to be on guard over here and how difficult it is. The Gemara tells us, Chazal tell us, Mesachtes derech eretz. Chachamim oimim kodem estakabak v'shalisha goizun av shuloi bonim bali mumin. Chazal tell us that if a person looks even at an ankle of a woman, Mefarshim explain it's the least most attractive place of a woman is the ankle. It's a place that none of us are desperate to see. The ankle of a woman. Wow, I can't wait to see that. I'm looking to see the ankle. Nobody does that. You have, for example, a building site. And on the building site, you've got goyish workers, constructive workers. They're sitting over there, they're, doing whatever they have to do. These guys are walking, they're standing over there, admiring the scenery. And there's a woman that walks past with a mini skirt. And you can see all their heads. Just like following that. Yes, she has legs. That's how she's walking past. What are you checking out? The Gemara says, if you look at the ankle of a woman, they're going to be geyser. You have children that are bali mumin. How much do we spend on our children? How much does every person in this room want to have good, gewaldige, ehrliche children? And yet Chazal tell us, look at this. Look what can happen. Where a person looks in the wrong way. When a person does the wrong thing. The Gemara in the Dorim, Daf Chof, called Tzoyfe Menoshim, Tzoyfe Bole De Aveira. The Gemara in Soita Daf Ches, En Yitzhar Shoylet Ele B'Masha Ein Royas. Every Aveira starts from the eye. It all begins from over there. Rabbeinu Yoina in the Mishnah Perkei Avos, Parak Aleph Mishnah Hey, Al Tarbe Sicha Me'isha. Don't speak excessively with a woman, and then it says a boitel medivrei Torah. What's the connections with Rabbeinu Yoina Pshat? That the Shovovim Torah women are so different. They don't go together. The lave, the heart, cannot be sovel, cannot cope with both of them. It's one or the other. Rabbi said there's no shaila. This is the battle of our generation. This is the battle that the Rabbeinu Shalom has chosen for our dor, for our generation. And the question is not why did you not win, but rather the question is, why did you not try? That's what the Rabbeinu Shalom wants from us. How will we face our grandparents who were able to be moise nefesh for every single aspect of Yiddishkeit? They were able to give their lives for Yiddishkeit, but we cannot give up looking at a picture. We cannot give up looking at something that we shouldn't because it's too difficult for us. When our grandparents were moise nefesh for Klal Yisrael, for Kedusha, for Kashrus, for Shabbos Kodesh, and we can't give up anything, and we can't be strong enough to say no, how are we going to face our grandparents after 120 years? And they're going to say, look what I did for Yiddishkeit, look what I did for future generations, what did you do? How are we going to cope with them? And I end with one last Meister Aboista from the Heilige Koshnitzer Maggid. The Koshnitzer Maggid said over the Moshel as follows. He said there was a famous carpenter, extremely well-known worldwide carpenter that made the most exquisite pieces of furniture. And he designed and put together the most beautiful furniture. And at one point he put together a beautiful piece, such a gorgeous piece. The way it was made, the way it was designed, every detail was there, the glass, the wood shapes, it was gorgeous. And it went on auction and it sold for millions of dollars then, which was a crazy amount even nowadays. And some very wealthy person bought it, and he bought it to be able to put in his dining room and to display all of the diamonds that his wife has, the beautiful watches that he had, the pearl necklaces, all the gorgeous jewelry that he had, and he used to store it, and that would be in display for everyone that came into his home. And eventually, the wheel of fortune turns, he lost a lot of his money, and he had to sell many of his items, and one of the items that had to go to the bank to sell in order to pay off the mortgage for his home and everything else that he took out was this piece of furniture. And the banks came along with a huge van. They took the furniture, they took this piece with it, they shoved it in the back of the van, already automatically smashing the glass, and it went from van to warehouse to another warehouse to a van to another store, and it got chipped over here and it got bashed over there and it got a little bit, scraped over there, till eventually it looked like a little cupboard that, does not worth very, very much, and eventually got sold to a shoemaker, somebody that fixes and makes shoes in Vienna. And he took it and he bought it to be able to put all of his shoelaces in. Right, nice exquisite piece, wasn't worth much money because it was bashed and everything else. And that designer, that carpenter who designed this beautiful piece of furniture was once walking the streets of Vienna and his shoelace snapped. And he said to someone over there, tell me something, could you help me? How do I get a new shoelace? Oh, there's a famous guy. Go down the street, turn right, you'll see over there, there's a store there. It's got a nice closet, a nice cupboard over there. Go choose over there. He goes there, he looks at this cupboard, he says, ooh, this looks very familiar. Takes another look and he says, this is it. This is my closet. This is the cabinet that I designed, that I made. It was worth millions of dollars. And it's sitting in a house, it's sitting in a store, worth almost nothing because it's chipped and it's cracked and it's bashed. Shem Yirachim, where's the real intrinsic worth? So the Heilige Koshnitzer Maggid, our neshama came down as the most beautiful, pure neshama. And it gets a bit bashed, gets a bit scraped, gets a bit, bashed and bruised along the way of this world in Olam Hazeh. Our job, Rabbi say, is to take that beautiful neshama and to return it back to the Rabbeinu Shalom after 120 years of being here in its purest form possible. Mitzvah Hashem, next week we shall continue. Have a good day.